In the year 1064, amidst the scorching deserts near Jerusalem, a tale defying all logic was about to unfold, stained with blood. 800 hardened men from the distant north, Viking warriors forged in countless battles, stood poised to confront an army 40 times their own size. The events of that day would forever alter the understanding of military might in the Holy Land, demonstrating that sometimes faith itself could prove to be the most dangerous weapon of all. The unfolding massacre would soon reveal chilling details, shattering every expectation about what religious fanaticism could truly achieve on the battlefield. The story began not under the desert sun, but on the misty shores of Norway. There, King Magnus III ruled. He was better known as Magnus Barefoot, a name given because he preferred traditional Scottish clothing over the usual royal garments. By his era, Christianity had indeed reached Scandinavia, but it had not put an end to the ancient Viking spirit. Instead, these two powerful forces had mixed together, creating something far more dangerous: holy warriors. King Magnus heard the urgent calls of Pope Alexander II, who was asking faithful Christians to defend the sacred sites of Christianity. Unlike other European nobles, who often saw these crusades as chances for political gain, Magnus saw something entirely different. He saw an opportunity to combine the fierce nature of Viking fighters with a divine purpose. His warriors would not simply march to the Holy Land as mere conquerors. They would go as direct instruments of God's will. The process of finding new soldiers was both harsh and very selective. Magnus did not want just any ordinary soldiers for his cause. He wanted only the very best, the most skilled warriors available. He sought veterans from the endless wars fought between the Nordic kingdoms, men who had shown their courage and strength not just once, but dozens of times in battle. Each of the 800 chosen men had to prove 3 key abilities. They needed to show complete mastery with an axe and sword, along with incredible physical endurance. Most importantly, they had to demonstrate an unshakable faith in their holy mission. For many months, these warriors underwent intense training. This training combined ancient Viking combat methods with new battle tactics they learned from Byzantine, hired fighters. They learned to fight as one united group, something Vikings usually did not do. They practiced defensive formations again and again. They drilled coordinated attacks and, critically, trained to keep their discipline even under the most extreme pressure. But the physical training was only half of their preparation. Magnus also brought in monks, warrior priests, and military chaplains to strengthen the spiritual side of his men. Every single day began and ended with prayer and devotion. Every meal was blessed with religious rituals. Every single weapon was made sacred through special ceremonies. These men were no longer simply soldiers. They were slowly becoming religious fanatics, imbued with the destructive power and fury of ancient berserkers ready to unleash their might. In the spring of the year 1064, the Viking fleet finally set sail from Bergen, a port city. However, Magnus had no intention of sailing straight to the Holy Land right away. His carefully planned strategy was to build both strength and experience during their journey. Their very first stop was the Orkney Islands, where he recruited local hired fighters who were already used to battling in warmer climates. From there, the fleet sailed south along the coasts of Spain. There, they fought in several skirmishes against local Muslim forces. Each of these fights served as a valuable lesson. The Vikings quickly learned that their new enemies were very different from the Saxons or Danes they had fought back home. The Muslim soldiers were skilled horsemen, deadly archers, and masters of various battlefield tactics. Yet the Vikings also discovered something crucial during these encounters. Their enemies were completely unprepared for the kind of desperate and fanatical ferocity that came from blending Viking warrior traditions with intense religious zeal. By the time winter arrived, the fleet had reached the great city of Constantinople. There, they formed important alliances with the powerful Byzantine Empire and acquired upgraded weapons and better armor for their upcoming battles. When spring eventually came, the expedition finally turned its course toward Jerusalem. By this point, word of their presence had already spread across much of the Muslim world. And yet, the Muslim commanders remained largely unworried. After all, what could 800 men truly achieve against the vast armies that protected the Holy Land? Emir Abu Nasr, known as Shams al-Muluke, the high commander of Muslim forces in the Jerusalem region, saw the arrival of the Vikings as a perfect chance to prove his immense power and discourage any future Christian attacks. He quickly gathered a massive army, numbering 40,000 men. This force included heavy cavalry, mounted archers, specialized infantry, and even siege engines. To him, the upcoming clash would not be a battle in the traditional sense. It would instead be a swift and total annihilation of the small Viking force. The two armies finally met on the dry, arid plains southeast of Jerusalem, close to the ancient fortress known as Herodion. The contrast between the two forces was truly staggering. On one side stretched the seemingly endless columns of the Muslim army. Their banners snapped loudly in the desert wind, and the thunder of thousands of hooves and marching feet created a constant, rumbling roar. On the other side stood a single, compact square of 800 Vikings, their shields glinting in the ruthless Middle Eastern sun, their axes poised, silent yet completely unyielding. Abu Nasr's strategy was straightforward, one he had successfully used many times before against various foes. His powerful cavalry would completely surround the Viking force, cutting off any escape. Then, his skilled archers would rain down countless arrows to weaken them. Finally, his numerous infantry would move in to strike the decisive final blow. Against countless other armies, this tactic had always proven foolproof. He had no reason to believe today would be any different. However, Magnus and his experienced commanders had carefully anticipated this exact strategy. During their long months of preparation and journey, they had studied the Muslim battle tactics with great care. They had crafted a response that cleverly used Viking strengths while exploiting known Muslim weaknesses. What Abu Nasr did not know was that these 800 men were not planning merely to survive the battle. They were planning to die as martyrs in the most lethal and destructive way imaginable. At the very first light of dawn, the desert itself seemed to tremble with the loud blare of Muslim war horns. The Muslim cavalry charged forward, thousands of riders thundering across the plain, their scimitars flashing brilliantly in the morning light. But instead of holding their ground in a traditional line, the Vikings did something utterly unexpected and shocking to their enemies. They deliberately split apart their formation. Now, one might wonder, how could 800 men even dream of defeating 40,000? The answer lay not in brute physical strength, but in a deep understanding of the psychology of warfare. This was something the Vikings understood far better than almost anyone else of their age. They knew that terror, a profound sense of dread, could be a more powerful weapon than sheer numbers. But before the exact moment this battle turned forever, there is a need to understand the shocking tactics used. The 800 Vikings divided into 8 distinct groups, each comprising 100 men. This was not a retreat, nor was it a desperate, last-ditch defense. It was instead the precise execution of a complex tactic they had perfected over months of intense training. They called it the Wheel of Death. Each group swiftly formed its own tight defensive circle, positioned strategically to create deadly killing zones between them. When the Muslim cavalry charged forward, expecting to crash through a traditional, solid line of defense, they instead found themselves riding directly into a living nightmare. The Viking circles cleverly allowed the enemy riders to pass between them, only to then quickly close ranks behind them, effectively trapping the cavalry in confined, deadly spaces. Suddenly, the horsemen were split apart, confused, and struck from all sides at once by unseen enemies. The first wave of riders who fell into this cunning trap experienced something no warrior of the Middle East had ever witnessed before. The Vikings fought not just with terrifying ferocity and wild abandon, but also with flawless, precise coordination. Every single strike was immediately supported by another warrior. Every defensive block created an opportunity for a swift counterattack. Their movements seemed almost telepathic, as if they were moving as one mind. But what truly horrified to the Muslim forces was not just the Vikings' incredible skill in battle. It was their complete immunity to both fear and pain. These men had entered what their ancestors called the Berserkergang, a battle frenzy. But now, it was supercharged by an extreme religious fanaticism, making them even more terrifying. They were not just warriors in a battle trance, they were true believers, utterly convinced that every enemy they slew guaranteed their own place in paradise. Abu Nasr, watching the battle unfold from a high vantage point, was not overly alarmed at first. Perhaps 1,000 of his men were lost in the opening clash, which he considered insignificant compared to the overwhelming size of his total army. He quickly ordered a second assault, this time using his mounted archers. Their goal was to maintain a safe distance and rain down a relentless storm of arrows upon the Viking positions, hoping to break their formation from afar. But the Norsemen had prepared for this very tactic too. During the night before the battle, each group had quickly built temporary fortifications, using the shields of fallen foes and any other materials they could find on the arid plain. When the storm of arrows finally fell, the Vikings huddled safely behind these makeshift walls, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike back with their own deadly force. What came next, Muslim chroniclers of the time would later describe as a glimpse of hell itself on earth. The Vikings did not simply defend themselves from the arrows. They counterattacked with powerful weapons their enemies had never seen before or encountered. They wielded war axes, specially forged to rip through even the strongest armor. They carried spears, tipped with hooks, perfect for dragging riders off their horses from several yards away. And most terrifying of all, they unleashed a flammable substance they had acquired during their stay in Constantinople, similar to the devastating Byzantine Greek fire. The second Muslim attack quickly collapsed into a horrific slaughter. Mounted archers, who were used to enemies breaking under their numerical superiority, suddenly found themselves facing men who simply refused to surrender. These Norsemen seemed to grow even stronger and more determined with every comrade that fell in battle. When a Viking was mortally wounded, he did not retreat or beg for mercy from his foes. Instead, he used his very last breath to kill as many enemies as possible, before his own death. Abu Nasr began to fully realize that this was not just another army he was fighting. These men were fighting as though they were already dead, fighting as if death was not something they feared, but rather their ultimate goal. Abu Nasr, shaken by the heavy losses that were rapidly piling up, decided to abandon his cautious, probing strikes. If archers could not break them, then sheer overwhelming numbers surely would. He would throw the full weight of his vast infantry against the Vikings, confident that no matter their ferocity, 800 men could never possibly hold against 20,000 charging soldiers coming from every direction. By midday, under the crushing heat of the desert sun, the third and most brutal phase of the battle officially began. Tens of thousands of Muslim infantry surged forward, completely encircling the Viking positions from all sides. Their plan was brutally simple and direct. They aimed to overwhelm the Northerners by sheer force of numbers, smothering them under endless waves of bodies and weapons. Against 25 men for every single Viking warrior, even the fiercest fighter should eventually crumble and break. But the Norsemen had been carefully saving their most devastating weapon for this exact, critical moment. During their winter spent in Constantinople, they had not only acquired superior armor and more advanced weapons, they had also learned the closely guarded secrets of the Byzantine Greek fire and had even developed their own terrifying variant of this nightmarish substance. Each Viking circle had carefully guarded reserves of it, waiting for the precise moment their enemies came close enough to be engulfed. When the Muslim infantry closed within 50 meters, the order was finally given. Hundreds of incendiary projectiles were launched at once, arcing dangerously through the scorching desert sky. In mere seconds, rings of intense fire erupted around each Viking position. This was no ordinary flame that could be easily put out. It clung fiercely to clothing and armor, and it could not be doused with water. It fed on the desert winds, growing hotter and higher with each passing gust. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Muslim forces. Pure panic ripped through the Muslim lines. Soldiers who, moments before, had marched with unwavering confidence now found themselves trapped in a living inferno. The agonizing screams of men, burning alive, filled the entire battlefield, mingling chillingly with the clash of steel and the guttural war cries of the Norsemen. The Vikings, instead of holding their ground in defense, immediately seized the terrifying moment. They burst forth from their fortified circles, charging through the absolute chaos with savage abandon and relentless fury. This was no longer warfare as the Muslim soldiers understood it. This was raw, primal violence, elevated to an extreme level by an unshakable religious conviction. Imagine the horrifying sight. 800 men, many already wounded from previous clashes, some even ablaze from their own inferno, sprinting across a hellish, burning battlefield. They screamed ancient prayers in Old Norse as they brutally hacked through terrified enemies who outnumbered them by dozens to one. It was a vision so unreal and shocking that it broke the minds of even seasoned warriors. Abu Nasr, watching his mighty army completely unravel before his very eyes, made a desperate final choice. If sheer numbers and fire could not win this battle, perhaps the death of the Viking leader would. He quickly called upon his personal guard, a force of 2,000 of his finest warriors, veterans of countless battles, men feared across the entire region. If anyone could turn the tide, he believed it was them. Their task was brutally simple. They were to cut down Magnus himself, and in doing so, shatter the Vikings' will to fight. This guard was truly legendary. They had faced Crusaders, Byzantines, Seljuk Turks, and many other formidable foes, never once experiencing defeat in battle. But when they clashed with Magnus and his hand-picked elite, they quickly realized they were up against something far beyond their comprehension or experience. Magnus himself was a towering figure, standing over 2 meters tall, wielding a massive double-headed axe said to have been blessed by the Pope himself. On the battlefield, he was more than just a man. He was a powerful symbol, a force of nature. His mere presence drove his loyal warriors into a frenzy and struck pure terror into his enemies. What followed was a furious battle within the larger battle. The finest warriors of both worlds collided in a storm of steel and blood. For a full hour, the outcome of this fierce personal clash hung precariously in the balance. The Muslim Guard fought with the sheer desperation of men who knew their entire army's survival depended solely on their actions. The Vikings fought with the absolute certainty that God himself had ordained their victory. It was the ultimate clash of 2 completely different visions of warfare and its purpose. At last, Magnus and Abu Nasr found themselves locked in single, deadly combat. Abu Nasr was no ordinary commander. He had trained in Damascus's inner schools of swordsmanship and had personally fought in dozens of duels. His skill with a blade was undeniable and impressive. But Magnus was something else entirely, something more. He was a powerful fusion of Viking brutality and refined European martial training. He was driven by a deep conviction that every single swing of his massive axe was guided by divine will. The duel lasted only a few minutes, swift and brutal. Abu Nasr fought valiantly and with great courage, but his skill eventually gave way to Magnus's unwavering conviction. When Magnus's axe finally struck its mark, it was not just the fall of a single commander, it was the psychological collapse of an entire army. From the very moment their leader's body hit the dusty ground, something profound broke inside the massive Muslim host. Soldiers who had begun the day with unshakable confidence now stared in sheer disbelief and terror. Could these 800 northern fanatics truly be unstoppable, invincible, in battle? The horrifying thought spread like wildfire through the ranks, and with it came an overwhelming, crippling terror. But the story takes an even darker turn at this point. One might assume the fall of Abu Nasr marked the battle's climax, the ultimate turning point. That assumption would be entirely wrong. What followed defied every shred of logic typically found in medieval warfare. With their commander slain and their best warriors decimated, the Muslim army should have logically retreated or surrendered. That would have been the rational and expected move. But mass psychology in a battle rarely follows simple logic. Instead, utter panic detonated through the ranks, spreading like an unstoppable plague. 40,000 men were instantly transformed into a stampeding mob of chaos. Soldiers trampled their own comrades in a desperate, frenzied scramble to flee from these terrifying demons who fought as if death itself were their ultimate victory. Officers who desperately tried to rally their men were completely ignored or, in some cases, brutally cut down by their own panicked troops. Magnus, seeing the entire enemy force in full, uncontrolled retreat, gave a chilling and ruthless order. There were to be no survivors. This was not merely a tactical decision in the heat of battle, it was, instead, an act of extermination, justified by the deep belief that God himself had handed them this victory to cleanse the Holy Land of all unbelievers. The result was not just a simple rout, but a 3-day hunt across the vast desert. The Vikings relentlessly pursued the fleeing Muslim soldiers, using every scrap of knowledge they had gathered during their long months of preparation and travel. They skillfully cut off escape routes, set up deadly ambushes, and cornered groups of helpless fugitives, leaving no one to escape their wrath. But this was no longer simply military strategy being carried out. It had become a grim, ritualistic act. Every captured enemy was executed, often with ancient prayers recited over his body. To the Vikings, this was not vengeance or mere cruelty. It was, to them, holy work. It was God's will, carried out with their axes and swords, without hesitation or mercy. On the very first day of the relentless pursuit, 10,000 Muslim soldiers were brutally slaughtered. On the second day, 15,000 more met their end. By the third day, only a few scattered survivors remained, desperately trying to escape the Vikings' reach. The Vikings, now satisfied that their divine purpose had been completely fulfilled, finally halted their merciless chase. When the dust finally settled, the massacre had claimed the lives of over 35,000 Muslim soldiers. Of the 800 Vikings who had marched bravely into the desert, only 230 had fallen. This was undoubtedly a staggering loss for the Vikings, yet it was almost nothing compared to the impossible odds they had initially faced and overcome. And yet, the consequences of this incredible battle extended far beyond the battlefield itself. Word of the Viking victory spread across the entire Muslim world like an uncontrolled wildfire. The shocking idea that a tiny Christian force had completely annihilated one of the region's strongest armies was utterly incomprehensible to many. Fear gripped the great cities of Damascus, Baghdad, and Cairo. For the very first time in decades, Muslim leaders began to seriously consider the terrifying possibility that the Christians might actually succeed in retaking Jerusalem. Magnus and his remaining warriors wasted no time in fully exploiting their newfound, fearsome reputation. They rallied local Christian allies who had suffered greatly under Muslim rule for generations, giving them hope and a new purpose. Within just a few weeks, their combined force swelled to more than 3,000 men, all fanatically devoted to the holy reconquest of the land. What followed was not a campaign of traditional conquest, fought with conventional armies, but rather one of pure terror and psychological warfare. Every single victory, no matter how small or insignificant, was immediately magnified into a legendary tale. Propaganda quickly painted the Vikings as supernatural warriors, directly sent by God himself to fulfill a divine purpose. Cities surrendered without a fight at the mere rumor of their approach. Such was the fear they inspired. Seasoned Muslim commanders, veterans of countless campaigns and battles, refused to even face them on the field. Magnus's fearsome reputation had become a weapon, more devastating and effective than any sword or fire. But this story does not end there, because the true and lasting impact of what happened in those deserts would not be fully revealed until decades later, when the fierce flames of the Crusades ignited across all of Europe. The massacre at Jerusalem became more than just a bloody victory in one battle. It quickly became an enduring legend, a powerful myth that would shape future events. The extreme brutality, the impossible odds overcome, and the sheer terror of 800 men destroying 40,000. It all spread far beyond the Holy Land itself. When news of this incredible feat reached Europe, it arrived at the perfect moment. Pope Urban II was actively preparing his call for the First Crusade, seeking to motivate European warriors. The tale of Magnus Barefoot and his warriors became the ultimate proof that God clearly favored Christian arms in battle. If a tiny band of Norse fanatics could utterly shatter a massive Muslim host, then imagine what the united armies of Christendom, filled with God's grace, could truly achieve. Chroniclers greatly exaggerated the story until it closely resembled a myth, stretching the truth of the event. They claimed that angels fought side by side with the Vikings, that their weapons had been miraculously touched by divine power, and that no arrow could ever pierce their consecrated armor. Whether people believed every single detail or not did not ultimately matter. The psychological impact of the story was immense and transformative for many. Thousands of nobles and knights, hearing of this northern miracle, became convinced that divine victory was absolutely guaranteed if they took up the cross and joined the crusade. However, the influence of Magnus's slaughter also carried darker, more severe consequences. His campaign set a terrible precedent, providing a chilling justification for absolute brutality in the name of religion. The idea that a holy war allowed the total annihilation of the enemy, leaving no survivors, became an accepted and deeply ingrained principle for many crusaders who followed. The brutal methods pioneered by the Vikings, the calculated use of terror, incendiary weapons like Greek fire, ritual executions, and relentless pursuit of fleeing enemies, were copied again and again by later Christian armies. What began as a unique and specific expedition by Magnus became a grim model for centuries of holy war and its terrible acts. Magnus himself did not live long enough to see the long, dark shadow cast by his actions. He died in the year 1069, cut down in battle against Turkish forces near Antioch, 5 years after his great victory. Yet even in death, his legend only grew stronger and more pervasive. Epic songs were sung about his deeds and his incredible bravery. Churches were even built in his honor and memory. His name was constantly invoked by warriors who desperately sought courage in battle, as if simply calling on him could somehow bring divine favor and protection. The few Vikings who survived the battles and eventually returned to Scandinavia were celebrated as living heroes, legends in their own time. Their incredible stories of Jerusalem lit a powerful fire in the hearts of a new generation of young men. Many of those young men would later march east themselves, joining the Crusades under the banner of Christ, inspired by Magnus's legacy. This model of small elite bands of religious fanatics defeating vastly larger armies was replicated countless times in the years to come, shaping many conflicts. Orders like the Templars and Hospitallers carried on the spirit of Magnus's warriors, powerfully combining unshakable faith with strict military discipline and training. But perhaps the most striking and enduring lesson of the massacre is what it truly reveals about the very nature of conviction. These 800 men did not triumph because of superior numbers, nor solely because of better weapons or cunning tactics. Although those certainly played a role, they triumphed because they believed with every fiber of their being that they were specifically chosen by God for their mission. That deep and powerful belief transformed them completely. They fought without any fear because they saw death in battle as a guaranteed path to paradise, a glorious reward. They endured unbearable desert heat, grievous wounds, and crippling fatigue. This was because each struggle they faced was, to them, a holy trial, a test of their devotion. They unleashed a ferocity that ordinary soldiers could never match, because they were utterly convinced they were the direct instruments of divine will. The Massacre of Jerusalem also exposed something fundamental about medieval warfare itself. Numbers alone did not always decide battles. Morale, faith, and psychological dominance often outweighed raw size and troop count. A small, unified, fanatically dedicated force could indeed topple a giant army if it managed to shatter their spirit and will to fight. Commanders across Christendom quickly took note of this incredible lesson. In the decades after the massacre, many attempted to replicate the Viking model, creating elite, faith-driven military units within their own armies. Some of these efforts succeeded spectacularly, achieving great victories. Others failed just as dramatically, unable to capture the same spirit. But the core lesson endured, powerful and clear. A soldier's belief, their inner conviction, could be more dangerous and potent than his sword. Propaganda also played a crucial part in this historical event. Once the Vikings had earned their reputation for invincibility, that very reputation became a powerful weapon in itself, influencing future events. Enemies surrendered before even fighting a single blow. Allies eagerly joined their cause. Campaigns were won not just with steel and fire, but with compelling and terrifying stories that spread rapidly. From today's modern perspective, the massacre is both awe-inspiring and deeply horrifying to contemplate. It dramatically shows the extreme limits of human capability when driven by absolute, unwavering conviction. It also shows how easily that incredible power can be turned toward atrocity and terrible deeds, because the same fanaticism that allowed 800 men to slaughter 40,000 is the same kind of extreme fanaticism that has fueled some of history's darkest and most brutal crimes. The intensity of belief itself is not necessarily the issue at hand. It is, instead, the morality of the specific cause that belief serves. Magnus and his men firmly believed they were fighting for God's will and purpose. Their enemies saw them as terrifying demons unleashed upon the desert, bringing destruction. Both perceptions contain elements of truth, depending on the viewpoint. What cannot be denied is that their actions were truly extraordinary, an extreme demonstration of what humans can achieve, for good or for ill, when united by a cause greater than themselves. The massacre also left deep scars in the Muslim world. For generations, the haunting memory of those northern fanatics lingered, troubling commanders and rulers alike. Even as they rebuilt their armies and strengthened their defenses, the legend of the Vikings lingered like a dark shadow over them. The idea that Christians could call upon such terrifying zeal and power made every future battle feel deeply uncertain. Back in Europe, the story became one of triumphant victory and divine intervention. It powerfully fueled the momentum that launched the First Crusade, inspiring countless warriors and terrifying opponents. It reshaped the very rules and understanding of holy war for centuries to come. Magnus Barefoot had become more than just a king. He had transformed into a powerful symbol, a stark reminder of what absolute faith, when combined with military might, could unleash upon the world. Even 1,000 years later, the lesson of his 800 warriors still resonates deeply within us. They remind us that the limits of human possibility are not always physical, but often mental and psychological. They teach us that sometimes the only true barrier between victory and defeat is what people believe is possible for them to achieve. Think about this idea. How many times in life do people walk away from something because it seems impossible before even truly trying? The Vikings of Magnus teach us that the impossible often exists only in the mind. Their story is both a powerful warning and an inspiration. A warning of the horrors that fanaticism can unleash upon humanity, and an inspiration of the sheer power of conviction when harnessed with a clear purpose. In the end, the Massacre of Jerusalem stands as one of the most extreme and fascinating examples in history of what a small group of dedicated people, driven by fervent belief, can truly achieve. It fascinates us because it shows the highest and lowest aspects of human nature all at once: incredible courage, unwavering loyalty, immense sacrifice, but also brutal cruelty and widespread destruction. It forces us to confront a difficult question with no easy answer. Was their deep devotion admirable, or was it monstrous in its execution? That is for each of us to carefully decide. What we cannot deny is that it was extraordinary, a moment when the world learned that faith could move more than mountains. It could move entire armies. It could permanently alter history itself. And so, as this tale of blood and fire closes, one should reflect on the profound lesson at its core. A small, committed band of fervent believers changed the fate of thousands and shaped the destiny of entire nations. Their unshakable conviction made the impossible a terrifying reality.